The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing.
324 days ago, Donald Trump announced Liberation Day, a sweeping slate.
Okay, so Trump absolutely exploded after the Supreme Court's February 2026 ruling that struck down most of his sweeping tariffs, and honestly, this might be the angriest we've ever seen him direct at the judicial system in his entire political career. The moment the decision came down on February 19, 2026, Trump took to Truth Social with a barrage of posts that pulled no punches, calling the Supreme Court a total disgrace and accusing several justices of lacking any real courage when it came to standing up for American interests. He didn't stop there. Just a day later, on February 20th, he held a fiery White House press conference where he went completely off script, his face flushed with frustration as he lambasted the court in language that felt unprecedented for a sitting president. He specifically zeroed in on two of his own appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, suggesting they had somehow been swayed by foreign interests, rather than focusing on protecting American workers and national security. This wasn't just mild criticism or a polite disagreement over legal interpretation. Trump was raging, declaring that he felt ashamed of certain members of the court, labeling them fools who didn't understand the stakes, and even going so far as to call them lapdogs, implying they were blindly following someone else's agenda instead of acting as independent judges. The ruling itself was a landmark 6-3 decision authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, invalidating about 70% of the tariffs Trump had imposed during the early months of his second term. Those tariffs, totaling around $175 billion, had mostly been justified under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 law that Trump claimed gave him basically unlimited authority to slap tariffs on any country at any level for as long as he wanted. The Supreme Court disagreed strongly. Roberts wrote that the law simply did not grant the president that kind of unchecked power, especially for such massive economic policy changes that carried huge impacts on trade, jobs, consumers, and international relations. The majority opinion leaned heavily on the major questions doctrine, a principle that says when an executive action involves really big, consequential policy decisions with broad economic or social effects, there needs to be crystal clear authorization from Congress. Without that explicit green light from lawmakers, the president can't just go ahead and rewrite major parts of the nation's trade policy on his own. Joining Roberts in the majority were the three liberal justices plus Gorsuch and Barrett, two of Trump's own picks from his first term. The dissenters were Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh, who sided with the idea that the president should have more leeway in using emergency powers for national economic security. Right away, Trump's reaction turned personal and intense. At that February 20th press conference captured live by outlets like News 18, he started off by saying the ruling would hurt American workers and undermine efforts to bring manufacturing jobs back home. But within minutes, he pivoted hard into direct attacks on the justices. He expressed deep disappointment, then escalated by saying he was ashamed of certain members who failed to show courage in defending the country. It was obvious he was pointing at Gorsuch and Barrett even before he named them later, because they were the Trump appointees who joined the majority against him. Trump praised the three dissenters, saying they understood the real importance of protecting American jobs and standing strong on national security. But the six in the majority, he called them fools and lapdogs in a phrase that echoed across headlines and social media for days afterward. Calling Supreme Court justices fools was already shocking enough, suggesting he thought they were too dim or misguided to grasp the legal and policy realities. But labeling them lapdogs took it to another level, painting a picture of justices who were subservient, sitting in someone else's lap and doing whatever they were told, rather than exercising independent judgment. Trump didn't stop at insults about intelligence or independence. He went further by claiming the majority had been swayed by foreign interests, an extraordinary accusation that carried heavy implications. He suggested, without offering any specific evidence, that foreign governments or companies had somehow influenced the justices to rule against the tariffs because those entities benefited from freer trade and lower barriers. No documents, no communications, no financial ties were cited, just the raw assertion that the decision smelled of outside meddling. This kind of rhetoric was dangerous because it didn't just disagree with the outcome, it actively worked to erode public trust in the Supreme Court's legitimacy. When a president accuses the highest court in the land of being corrupted by foreign powers, it plants seeds of doubt among his supporters that the institution itself might be rigged against them. Over the following weeks, that narrative seemed designed to prepare the ground for potential defiance, making it easier for people to dismiss future rulings as illegitimate rather than binding law. Media coverage captured the intensity perfectly. News 18 and various YouTube channels that followed the event in real time highlighted how Trump's voice rose during the press conference, how his usual bombastic style turned even more combative as he unloaded on the court. The Guardian ran a detailed analysis on February 21, 2026, describing the ruling as a bloody nose for Trump from the Supreme Court, noting how rare it is for a president to lose a major policy case with his own appointees voting against him. The piece emphasized that this wasn't just a one-off loss on tariffs. The use of the major questions doctrine created a precedent that could ripple across many other parts of Trump's agenda. If the court required clear congressional authorization for big tariff moves, the same logic could apply to aggressive immigration executive orders, attempts to roll back environmental regulations, or even efforts to challenge birthright citizenship. Suddenly, multiple pillars of Trump's second-term plans looked more vulnerable to legal challenges than they had before. Even a month later, the anger hadn't cooled. On March 25, 2026, at an NRCC dinner, Trump brought the issue up again, still fuming. CNBC covered the remarks where he directly named Gorsuch and Barrett, saying his two appointees had cost the country hundreds of billions of dollars. He wasn't just critiquing their legal reasoning. He was framing it in deeply personal, transactional terms, as if appointing them to the bench created an unspoken debt of loyalty that they had failed to repay. In Trump's view, he had given them lifetime seats on the highest court, and in return, they should have backed his economic vision no matter what. When they didn't, it felt like betrayal. This revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the judicial role. Judges aren't extensions of the president who appointed them. They're supposed to interpret the law independently, guided by the Constitution and statutes, not by political loyalty or campaign promises. Gorsuch and Barrett, both highly respected legal scholars before joining the court, had simply concluded that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not stretch as far as Trump claimed. That wasn't disloyalty. It was them doing their constitutional duty. This outburst fit into a broader pattern of Trump clashing with the judiciary whenever decisions didn't go his way. Around the same time, on March 16, 2026, coverage from YouTube channels and news scripts showed Trump attacking District Judge Boasberg, calling him wacky, and even demanding his impeachment after the judge blocked certain Department of Justice actions related to immigration enforcement and other priorities. Trump has a long history of this approach, going back to his first term and even his campaigns, where he would label judges biased, corrupt, or politically motivated if they ruled against him. But taking that same combative stance towards Supreme Court justices, especially ones he personally selected, crosses into new territory. The Supreme Court is the final arbiter of legal questions in the United States. There is no higher appeal. When a president openly questions their integrity and suggests they are fools or influenced by outsiders, it chips away at the foundation of the rule of law. It signals that court rulings might be treated as optional suggestions rather than binding decisions that the executive branch must follow. Beyond the personal attacks, Trump's immediate response included vows to work around the ruling by imposing new tariffs using different legal authorities. He talked about a potential 10% blanket tariff on imports from various countries, arguing he could find other statutes or powers to justify it. This set the stage for another round of legal battles. Legal experts quickly pointed out that if the Supreme Court had ruled the major questions doctrine applied to such sweeping trade actions, simply switching to a different law probably wouldn't solve the problem. Any broad tariff policy with massive economic impact would likely face the same scrutiny, requiring explicit congressional approval that wasn't there. If Trump pushed forward anyway, challenges would flood the lower courts, potentially looping back to the Supreme Court again. Each new loss could deepen his frustration, leading to even sharper rhetoric and raising the specter of a constitutional standoff where the president tests the limits of judicial enforcement. The tariff ruling also connected directly to other high-stakes cases moving through the system at the same time. Just weeks later, on March 31, 2026, the Supreme Court heard arguments on Trump's executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants. Lower courts had already blocked that order, citing violations of the 14th Amendment, which has long been understood to guarantee citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. The case turned on similar themes of executive overreach and the major questions doctrine. If the court applied consistent reasoning from the tariff decision, Trump's move to reshape citizenship policy through executive action alone would likely fail. Birthright citizenship is a profound constitutional matter, not something that can be altered unilaterally without clear legislative backing or amendment. A loss there, especially if Gorsuch and Barrett again joined the majority, would compound Trump's sense of betrayal and intensify his attacks on the court. Adding to the tensions within the administration, there were reports around early April 2026 about Attorney General Pam Bondi facing internal pressure or even discussions of replacement linked to perceived failures in handling certain Department of Justice priorities, including high-profile investigations and loyalty concerns. While not directly tied to the tariff case, it illustrated broader cracks where loyalty tests seemed to clash with institutional norms. Trump's expectation that appointees across government and the judiciary would prioritize his agenda over independent judgment created friction at multiple levels. Stepping back to look at the wider implications, this Supreme Court showdown and Trump's explosive reaction represent a watershed moment for his second term. First, the attacks on the justices break long-standing norms about how presidents engage with the judiciary. Historically, even when presidents have strongly disagreed with rulings, they have usually expressed respect for the institution and avoided personal insults or conspiracy-laden accusations against individual justices. Trump's approach, accusing his own appointees of being lapdogs to foreign interests, pushes those boundaries further than most predecessors would have dared. The danger lies in how this rhetoric filters down to the public. Polls have already shown declining trust in the Supreme Court among certain political groups, and sustained presidential broadsides could accelerate that erosion. If large numbers of Americans, particularly in Trump's base, come to view the court as just another partisan battlefield rather than a neutral guardian of the Constitution, respect for its rulings could diminish. That weakens the separation of powers, one of the core safeguards of American democracy. Second, the practical fallout from the ruling creates immediate economic and policy headaches. The $175 billion in collected tariffs now need to be refunded to importers, creating a significant fiscal gap. Lost future tariff revenue means the government has less money coming in, forcing choices between cutting spending, raising other taxes, or increasing the deficit. Each option carries political costs. Cutting programs disappoints key constituencies. Raising taxes contradicts core Republican principles that Trump himself has championed. Ballooning the deficit makes it harder to claim fiscal responsibility. On top of that, businesses that had invested or planned around the expectation of tariff protection now face uncertainty. American manufacturers who expanded capacity thinking they would be shielded from foreign competition might struggle without that buffer, potentially leading to layoffs or closures. The resulting economic disruption could be pinned on the court in Trump's narrative, but in reality, it stems from the original policy being struck down as unlawful. Third, the decision hands Democrats powerful talking points heading into the 2026 midterms. They can highlight how Trump's tariffs were ruled illegal, how they potentially raised costs for American consumers and businesses before being invalidated, and how the president responded by attacking the very justices he appointed. Democrats can frame the episode as evidence of overreach, arguing that Trump tried to act like a king rather than a president constrained by law. Pointing to Gorsuch and Barrett voting against him serves as a powerful visual that even conservative Trump-selected judges saw the actions as exceeding presidential authority. This narrative could appeal to moderate and suburban voters who might otherwise lean Republican on economic issues but feel uneasy about institutional attacks and norm breaking. If Democrats successfully mobilize those voters, they could make significant gains in the House and possibly challenge for the Senate, shifting the balance of power and making the rest of Trump's term far more difficult. Fourth, the ruling undercuts the heart of Trump's economic populism. His appeal to working-class voters has always centered on the promise to fight for them against global elites, using tools like tariffs to protect jobs and revive manufacturing. When the Supreme Court knocks those tools out of his hands and he responds by raging at the court instead of adapting within legal bounds, it risks making him look ineffective rather than unstoppable. Supporters deeply loyal to Trump will likely stick with him, viewing the loss as another example of the establishment blocking a champion of the people. They might blame globalists, liberal justices, or weak Republicans rather than question Trump's strategy. But at the margins, voters who crossed over because of concrete promises on trade and jobs might start to wonder whether the delivery can match the rhetoric. If enough of those marginal voters drift away, it could hurt Republican candidates in competitive districts during the midterms. Fifth, the episode highlights and deepens divisions within the Republican coalition. Trump's working-class populist base strongly supports aggressive tariffs as a way to shield American labor from cheap imports. In contrast, traditional business-oriented Republicans and their donors often oppose broad tariffs because they raise input costs for companies, disrupt supply chains, and can spark retaliatory measures from trading partners. Legal conservatives, including figures like Gorsuch, who prioritize originalist and textualist interpretations, see unauthorized executive tariffs as a violation of separation of powers that properly belongs to Congress. The Supreme Court decision forces these tensions into the open. Some Republicans will rally behind Trump and criticize the court for tying the president's hands. Others will quietly welcome the ruling because it aligns with free market principles or protects business interests. Still others will try to dodge the issue to avoid alienating any faction. This internal splintering makes it harder for the party to maintain a cohesive message and strategy as they head toward the 2026 elections. Sixth, the tariff case provides fresh ammunition for those pushing impeachment or other accountability measures against Trump. Democrats and critics can point to the Supreme Court's explicit finding that Trump exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act as evidence of a pattern of overreach. Combined with his public defiance, personal attacks on judges, and vows to find workarounds, it builds a narrative of a president who refuses to accept constitutional limits. If Democrats gain ground in the midterms and control one or both chambers of Congress, they could use this precedent to pursue investigations, oversight, or even impeachment proceedings with greater credibility. Even if removal isn't realistic, the political theater and constant headlines could drain Trump's energy and distract from his policy goals. Seventh, the longer-term risk involves the potential for constitutional crisis if Trump continues testing the boundaries. Suppose he imposes new 10% blanket tariffs under alternative authorities, and those get struck down too. The choice then becomes compliance, which would feel like a humiliating retreat from a signature promise, or defiance, which would challenge the enforceability of judicial decisions. The American system has no simple mechanism for a president simply ignoring the Supreme Court. Congress could threaten impeachment, but that requires political will and votes. The bureaucracy might resist implementing unlawful orders. States or private parties could sue or refuse cooperation. Without clear resolution paths, such standoffs erode norms and increase instability. Trump's brand is built on winning and never backing down, so the pressure to escalate rather than concede could grow with each adverse ruling. Looking at the full picture, the Supreme Court's February 19, 2026 decision striking down the bulk of Trump's tariffs marked more than just a policy setback. It exposed tensions between executive ambition and constitutional constraints, between personal loyalty and judicial independence, and between different visions of what American governance should look like. Trump's furious response, complete with accusations of foolishness, subservience, and foreign influence, showed a deep frustration with any institution that dared to say no. By calling his own appointees fools and lapdogs, by suggesting the court had been compromised without evidence, he escalated a disagreement over law into a broader assault on the legitimacy of the judiciary itself. T.